What is up, everyone? Crunchy Frog here. And Call of Duty released their Call of Duty HQ app alongside Modern Warfare 2 in 2022 as a means of being a central hub meant to house all future Call of Duty games. Now, alongside this release, they also mentioned that this began the quote new era of Call of Duty, which would entail all dev studios working more cooperatively and cohesively, developing off of the same branch of a unified COD engine. Now, all of this was done to kind of bring together the yearly COD releases and more or less wrangle everything into a more, like I said, cohesive and homogenized experience year over year. Back then they stressed that each game was still going to be its own entity, but that now it would be housed in a central hub, which was the COD HQ application. Now, this meant that new games would not be installed separately anymore as brand new games, but rather installed as almost pseudo DLCs for just the base Call of Duty HQ app. Activision hailed this as a great innovation and claimed that it would be an amazing step forward for the franchise. But to be honest, after 3 years of this, quote, more unified vision, I'm starting to really wonder if COD HQ was a positive thing at all. So today we'll discuss several key factors for why I believe Call of Duty HQ is a net negative for the franchise as a whole. So as always, guys, if you enjoy content like this, make sure to leave a like. It's so important in getting new people here to the channel. And if you'd like to stick around and see all the latest Call of Duty news, discussions, commentaries, and reviews, make sure you are subscribed. And finally, if you would like to support the channel monetarily and get access to cool perks like seeing every video up to a day early, click that join button and become a channel member today. Now, to start off, the first reason really that I feel that Call of Duty HQ is kind of tearing down the franchise as a whole is that almost every single game feels the same from a tonal perspective. Now, games used to feel different year over year. I know if you've been anywhere near the internet in the last 15, 20 years, everyone has complained that COD is the exact same thing every year. And while I guess that's kind of true to a certain extent, most of them are just being haters. And year over year, it used to feel like drastically different experiences. I mean, we went from COD 4, which was the first game in the Call of Duty franchise to be in a modern setting, a huge shakeup to the formula. The next year, we went back in time to World War II for World of War, which felt like a grittier, almost horror-like experience, totally tonally different from the game the year before. And then we went back into the very near future with Modern Warfare 2, which was set, several years ahead of the release date. And then we went back in time again for the next year of Call of Duty with Call of Duty Black Ops, which took place during the Cold War, more specifically during the 60s and 70s. And then we went back forward in time rather for Modern Warfare 3 in 2011, and then the next year went even further for the first futuristic Call of Duty game with Black Ops 2. So to kind of sum that up, every single year during the golden age of COD and for several years afterwards felt markedly different to the game that came before it, both in terms of tone, spectacle, art style, direction, kind of setting, things like that. So while you still had the haters online calling Call of Duty the exact same game every year, you at least had enough ammunition in your back pocket to prove them wrong, to show them that this year was markedly different than last year. Even if the physics and the gunplay and everything felt kind of the same, at the end of the day, the whole entire package and presentation was much different. However, now all games tend to feel the same ever since Modern Warfare 2 because largely they are the same. Hell, even this year with Treyarch back at the helm and the game set 30 years prior in the 1990s, things still feel nearly identical, both in terms of tone and setting, as well as graphically, to the last 2 years with Modern Warfare 2 and Modern Warfare 3. Again, we used to be in drastically different time periods, and the games felt different. Even the music, the ambiance, the art style, everything like that used to feel different. Now, even a 30-year jump in time, the games end up just feeling nearly identical, with the exception of maybe one or two maps that you can kind of tell take place in the 90s. Now, I think this trend slightly started, or at least they started dipping their toes in the water, the whole way back in Modern Warfare 2019, especially since the Call of Duty HQ that we talked about in the intro. I think that's when this problem really started to ramp up and everything felt the same. All games began intermingling, and they even started joining an MCU level of shared universe, both from a story perspective, but also from a tone and setting, art style type directive as well. And that leads to everything just feeling the same year over year, even more so than it had in past years. Games no longer feel like a brand new product and a brand new experience every year, just kind of a continuation of last year's Call of Duty, which has now been going on since, again, Modern Warfare 2, we're going on 3 years, and depending on what Call of Duty 2025 looks like, we could be into 4 straight years of largely the exact same feeling Call of Duty. Even the little quality of life improvements that came with the Call of Duty HQ, like a shared UI experience that was probably implemented to make things feel easier and easier to adjust for new players year over year, it just ends up making everything feel similar. It doesn't feel enough like a new game every year. It doesn't feel like anything was iterated upon. Honestly, it's starting to kind of go the way of the Maddens and the 2Ks of the world, which are largely just roster updates every year, or in Call of Duty's case, a gun roster update. And COD's value proposition for why you should pay $70 for a new product every year is that even though it's largely the same franchise and it has the same roots and plays largely the same, otherwise why would you buy it, right? Each game used to feel markedly different, both in terms of tone and slight variations to gameplay from the year previously. Now, obviously, yes, some games felt the same, like Modern Warfare 2 to Modern Warfare 3 back in the day, but again, every year you were getting drastically different experiences to the year before, so it kind of made sense why you would need to buy the new Call of Duty game. You know, you would be playing in a totally different time frame and different aesthetic and everything like that. And to kind of tie in with that, not only is the game tonally very the same year after year, it also discourages innovation by using the Call of Duty HQ app. Studios used to have their own flair and their own takes on the Call of Duty engine and the Call of Duty formula. This led to games, again, feeling and playing slightly different in back-to-back years. There started to become kind of two basic camps that people started to fall in between the Infinity Ward crowd and the Treyarch crowd because their games markedly felt different. If you actually played Call of Duty enough to pick up on nuances like that and played it enough to care enough, you could definitely tell the difference between a Modern Warfare game and a Black Ops game. And while some eccentricities still remain nowadays, largely these games have just been homogenized and pushed and kind of shoved into a singular product. There's not as much differentiation depending on the dev studio that's tackling it that year. And couple this with the fact that all studios are now using the same branch of the Call of Duty engines and kind of working off the same general base game year over year. Now, again, COD used to have the same kind of engine, right? Everyone was working off of the Call of Duty engine, but there was different branches of the engine that Treyarch would use as opposed to what Infinity Ward was using. And historically, Infinity Ward kind of used each of their releases to iterate on the engine or improve the engine or in some cases completely overhaul the engine like we saw with Modern Warfare 2019. But, you know, so even though they were, since its inception, kind of working off of the same homework, so to speak, they had drastically different takes on it, sometimes even using several years old code from the engine just so it felt more like their studio's type of game. Nowadays, they have less opportunity to really leave their signature mark. And, you know, every dev studio has to play within the bounds of a shared engine, and this is a huge part, the constraints of Warzone. Arguably, Warzone may have been the deciding factor in implementing all of this, as the games had to at least feel common enough such that adding content from the new games to Warzone wouldn't feel out of sorts or completely disjoint the experience. Now, technically, some of these improvements have helped the game feel more cohesive and ensure that recent advancements are shared between the studios so we're not losing features year over year, which admittedly is a net positive from a, once again, no feature left behind standpoint. But the byproduct of this is games are not branching out or trying anything too innovative year over year. As a matter of fact, one of my biggest gripes, if you haven't already checked out my Black Ops 6 review for the multiplayer, one of my biggest gripes was that nothing was crazy innovative about it. Even the movement system that they added was just kind of a meh change. They didn't break up the formula. They didn't try anything too crazy. They didn't stick their neck out there. And it's largely because they can't with the brand new Call of Duty HQ setup. And another thing to blame and this is admittedly kind of an issue for the games industry as a whole, we're starting to see diminishing returns on innovation year over year. You've probably seen countless posts on Twitter or Reddit or anything like that showing the difference between games 1 or 2 years apart back in the early 2010s or mid 2000s as opposed to now, right? Games aren't exactly innovating or breaking the mold as much year over year as they have in the past. And Call of Duty is suffering the same thing. Back in the day, we used to get pretty decent graphical upgrades year over year in one way or another. Maybe the lighting engine was slightly better, textures were upscaled, guns looked better, they were able to spend more time on character models, etc., etc. But now there's kind of leaps and bounds in terms of technical prowess just aren't there. And part of this, once again, is to blame the industry as a whole. I think we're running out of things to innovate on, and we're, kind of reaching that end point where graphics are going to look as good as they're going to look and can't get much better. And, we have decades and decades of innovation and research that largely we're just seeing diminishing returns. But also, Call of Duty shifting to a more homogenized approach means there's less chance to innovate even in the space that there is room to do so. So I think both of those factors come together to really just the last few years, nothing new or crazy has been tried in any of these games. And I just, to kind of summarize all this, between working on the same engine, having to have multiple facets of the game feel seamless enough to integrate into Warzone, which I think is a massive part of this whole problem, and integration to the shared hub of Call of Duty HQ, and then just a general lack of innovation in the gaming space as a whole, Call of Duty HQ is just starting to make CODs feel even more stagnant and more samey than ever before, which is not a good thing. If the trolls on the internet from 2010 that harassed me constantly telling me that Call of Duty is the same game every single year were still around today to see kind of what the last 3 years were, they would have a field day. And honestly, I would have no rebuttal because the game is just starting to feel like a copy and paste more and more year over year. Now, this next point is kind of a small issue, and I'm not sure it's a massive thing, a massive thorn in anyone's side, so to speak, but this Call of Duty HQ thing has kind of led to Call of Duty, at least on the Xbox, being a bloated mess with a confusing file structure. Now, once again, I can't speak for PC because I basically buy COD on the Xbox every single year, but I know from my experience on the Xbox, it is a mess trying to install or uninstall new games or portions of new games as they release. Now, I kind of have a horror story, and if any of you logged into my Black Ops 6 release night stream back in October, I had a massive issue with this because the Call of Duty app was not kind of cooperating, and I tried uninstalling certain parts of Modern Warfare 3 and installing other parts, all the while managing my file structure, right? My the physical space on my drives on my Xbox because the game is so massive. And I finally got everything squared away the night before. I had preloaded the game. I had updated Modern Warfare 3 so that I could play for a little, a couple hours leading up to the release at midnight before I shifted over to start playing Black Ops 6. Everything was good. I left my Xbox overnight. I came, to start the stream the next evening, and everything was gone. And it took me about an hour and a half to get everything sorted again, and an additional hour or so for files to download at the bare minimum to be able to play Black Ops 6. Luckily, everything installed right around midnight, and I was able to kick off the game. But again, this whole confusing file structure and all the games being technically pieces of the Call of Duty HQ instead of their own separate games, it was just a nightmare. And I know a couple other people experienced the same glitch that I did, so I can't necessarily pin it entirely on the fact that it's Call of Duty HQ. It could have been an Xbox Store issue, but at the end of the day, it just led to an absolute nightmare scenario. And if anyone else has an Xbox or a PS5 and has gone through similar things, definitely let me know in the comment section. Have you guys suffered with this? It is an absolute nightmare trying to work through and ascertain all these little bits and pieces of the game instead of just a single game installed on your hard drive and a new one installed for next year's game. This also leads to, once again, the file sizes are gigantic. You hear everyone complaining about the digital footprint that Call of Duty leaves on your hard drive. Now, I will say, they have implemented things in recent releases that you can now uninstall individual little bits and pieces, so that you can free up 20 gigs here, 50 gigs here, depending on certain modes that you don't want to play. But again, that only adds to the confusion and some of the issues that I experienced on Black Ops 6's launch night. And it's ironic given the fact that putting everything in the same umbrella was supposed to make it easier, but instead, through all these factors, has just made the game a more convoluted, confusing, bloated mess. Now, finally, the last thing that I wanted to talk about is the feeling that all of this should just be carried forward and not become new games year over year. They're kind of in the worst of both worlds scenario currently. Now, Call of Duty fatigue has realistically been an issue since the early 2010s, but a game back then, each year, the new games did enough differently, either from a feature or aesthetic and tone perspective, to kind of rationalize a new release, right? Rationalize that $60 price tag, at least for the most part. And people have been begging pretty much since the early 2010s for a 2 to 3 year life cycle COD, or asking the devs to just take a year or two off in the meantime to ensure a higher quality experience. But now, with everything feeling the same, that kind of sentiment is ramped up even more than ever before. Starting with Warzone back in 2020, whenever Cold War began launching, COD has started using a quote-unquote carry-forward method to integrate its content and events with each new game that has come out, at least in the context of Warzone, if not also multiplayer. Now, this includes adding characters from the other games as skins, which then you have to weave into the story, like we talked about before, in a MCU-style kind of I don't even know what to call it, like shared universe. But also adding in weapons from the upcoming games, perks from the upcoming games, the small gameplay additions that they do manage to make at the end of the day. And obviously, they have to make this all work in Warzone year over year, because Warzone is kind of the through line now for each individual Call of Duty game. So now the series is partially listening to fans and maybe not necessarily sunsetting every bit of content after 12 months, but it also wants its money, and so it's still releasing a brand new $70 game every year. Basically, the devs and execs at Activision are having their cake and eating it too. Pair that with each new game feeling nearly identical to each other, like we talked about before, and using the same engine, and the notion of just take a year off and let this game breathe has never been stronger amongst the community, myself included. The carry forward feature in Modern Warfare 2 to Modern Warfare 3, in my opinion, was a great idea, but even then, they weren't satisfied with just settling down and making a year 2 of content for a game, and instead they opted to still charge fans $70, which in my opinion, again, if you've seen my review for Modern Warfare 3, we kind of deduced that the game was more or less a glorified year 2 DLC, and that's how it should have gone down. We should have never gotten Modern Warfare 3, we should have just gotten year 2 expansion for Modern Warfare 2 and kind of let the game breathe for a year. But again, they can't do that. They need their $70 year after year, and so we're left with what we currently have. In my opinion, they should either commit to one direction or the other and make games either markedly different year over year to justify that $70 price tag, or just finally go the way of Fortnite or several other live service games and just start lumping everything into one experience and then slowly iterate on it until you build up to massive changes, either with a new release or in Fortnite's case, they do the new chapters or seasons or wherever where they blow up a map, stuff like that, and they actually innovate on the game several years after the last large innovation. However, I don't think the devs will do this, because at the end of the day, that financial report will no longer show that $70 cash infusion from each individual user year after year. So essentially, we're getting all of the fatigue of a bloated, iterative snowball of a live service game, and all of the price gouging of being charged for a new game releasing every year and not getting any of the benefits of either one of them. Once again, we are truly in a worst of both worlds type of situation, and in my opinion, the value proposition for COD has never been lower. It has never been harder to recommend to a friend to drop $70 on a game than ever before. This is the worst it has been my entire time in the franchise, dating back to 2007. So in conclusion, I think the Call of Duty HQ idea as a whole, they meant well with it, but in execution, I don't think it works well. I think that they either need to make games markedly different each year again to justify that big price tag, or again, finally cave and just start making one product that you iterate on every year. Stop doing the yearly releases. Now you just have Call of Duty and Call of Duty Warzone, and those get yearly additions or content packs or expansions, kind of like Destiny or similar games like that. I could also see them doing two different universes, each with 2 or 3 year lifespans. So, for example, Infinity Ward could release a Modern Warfare game that could basically have a life cycle of 2, 3, or maybe even 4 years, wherein it gets yearly updates and content DLCs and stuff like that. But it is still, at the end of the day, the same game. And then again, 2, 3, 4 years in the future, Treyarch could release another game, a Black Ops universe game with massive improvements that they've been able to make over the last 4 or 5 years of development time, etc. Again, that game would get 2 to 4 years of time to breathe with content additions, stuff like that. People could save their skins, everything like that that comes with these carry forward type deals. And then bam, we get another big game back on the Infinity Ward side, and we can kind of ping pong back and forth like we used to, but now this time with even more time for the developers to be able to rein everything in and create even better games. I think honestly this is kind of the approach that they used to take back in the day. Like I said, we were ping ponging between the past with Treyarch games and the present or even barely near future with the Infinity Ward Modern Warfare games, and it worked wonderfully. There was drastic tone shifts between each game, and they rationalized the $60 price tag. I just think that now game development takes longer than ever, so now you have to stretch that formula out over 2 to 3 years. So let each game, again, roast in the oven, get some extra little year 2 content, year 3 content, stuff like that. Have like 15 or 18 seasons for every game, instead of just charging people $70 each year. This means that every technically new game that comes out will feel drastically different. And overall, I just want something to mix up the formula to stop Call of Duties from feeling so identical year over year. And I think this Call of Duty HQ idea is only going to make that worse. Honestly, once again, one of the worst parts about Black Ops 6 in my mind is how similar it has felt to the last 2 years. I have Call of Duty fatigue after a month of playing the game, and it's only gotten worse since then. So now that I've ranted your ears off, let me know down in the comment section below your thoughts on the Call of Duty dev cycle as it is today. What do you think of Call of Duty HQ? What would you do differently to really shake up the formula? And what can Call of Duty do to bring you back if you've stopped playing the franchise? As always, guys, if you made it this far and you've enjoyed the video, leave a like as it helps others find the channel. And until next time, you all have a great day.